Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me, Eli.
Yeah, glad to have you here, sitting here with Mike DeSanti. Mike, I met you through your work with the Sweat Lodge. So actually, I met you, I'm not sure, you probably know this, through the podcast. I mean, if not for the podcast, I would not have met you because I was interviewing Faith Nice. I'd gone to Costa Rica in May, and we did an ayahuasca retreat, and the last day there, some of us did a Sweat Lodge ceremony with the Lakota tribe. And I was like, wow, this thing is awesome. It was so good, you know? And what was funny was that it wasn't positioned to us nearly the way it was, meaning the fact that half of us went and half of us didn't when we were there for a healing weekend.
Right.
You know, it was like, oh, no one's going to miss ayahuasca, right? But Sweat Lodge, it's like, okay, yeah, it's this nice little thing that you can kind of use it to maybe, you know, it sounded almost no different than a sauna. I was like, okay, it's a nice little thing.
Right.
And I went there and I was like, wow, this was amazing. Like so healing, so deep, so profound. And that probably within the next 10 days, I was interviewing Faith Nice on the podcast. And I brought up this Sweat Lodge that I did in Costa Rica. And afterwards she said, you know, I know someone who leads them in Miami, this guy, Michael DeSanti. And
Wow.
that's how that connection forms.
And then I get a random WhatsApp message from you, and I didn't realize the serendipity of us meeting, the chance of us meeting, and then now to be able to be talking about this and having experienced one together,
Yes.
I'm grateful and blessed, and it makes me, things like this, stories like this, make me pause and really look at the greater web that we're all connected to, which is great. So
The design
I love that.
Right.
I love that that's how we're connected. So chance and serendipitous like that.
Right, super cool. And I've told you this before, but you know, when we started the podcast, we didn't know the way, like where it's going to go. But recently, it's turned into this the House of More, right? The podcast In Search of More and the House of More, which when you and I met, that didn't exist. Well, the house existed, but not in the current state. So what I've told you and what I think is cool to share with those listening is that I had this house that I purchased probably almost 2 years ago, about 20 months ago. And I didn't know why I bought it. I just loved the property. And I thought, hey, could be a pretty cool investment. Let me fix it up and see. And there was this thought in my head a few times that, hey, maybe this would be great for healing. I mean, it's got amazing trees on the property and amazing nature and a lot of space. And everyone I brought to it was like, what do you have this property for? Like, what sense does this make?
Right.
And you were the first person who gave me like affirmation about the property. Because we had come here to look at the Sweat Lodge, you know, where we are now.
Yeah.
In my home. And you're like, this looks a little bit too like manicured
Yes.
for what we're going to do to your property here.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, I have another one we can check. You know, it's up for sale. And when you went, you were like as excited as I was about it.
It just made so much sense to me. I was like, it's built for this. And then I think the courage and the audacity that you have is like, oh, I'm just going to do it then. Let's go. And then now that having produced so much already in a short amount of time there, it's just more validation and affirmation. Like
Right.
That's the space for it. So that's
Yeah,
great. I'm blessed to just be a small part of that. That's so great.
Right. Once it's there, then it was like, yeah, obvious. Like,
Of course, that's what we would be doing here. But you're right.
right.
Yeah.
Now I started walking in the backyard with you and like smoking the cigarette. Like, this is the perfect spot for the Sweat Lodge. Like, this is it. We can do it right here. That way's east. We face east.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
You know, in Judaism also, the prayers are all done facing east.
You were telling me. Yeah. You
Yeah.
were telling me that when we designed the area for it.
Yeah. It's not about the direction though. It's about the what's in the direction. It's praying towards Jerusalem.
Right.
So Jerusalem is east of.
From here.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. Super cool.
I wish you so much. We would say so much good medicine. Right? I wish you so much good medicine in that endeavor and in that spot. And you've already produced so much good medicine there. So I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, I need a lot of medicine clearly because because it's there. So I end up joining these breathworks and sweat lodges and other stuff that I'm not in a space that I would say, oh, I can really use one now. But once it's going on, I'm like, hey, let me go, or, meeting people who are using the home for the first time. So I'm out there, and then I'm sitting in a breath work or going to a sweat lodge, and then I walk out of it. I'm like, man, I really needed that.
I needed that more than I knew. Yeah.
Right. So,
Wow, it's great. It's an outstanding thing you're doing.
so let's talk about sweat lodge, your story, how you got into it. Obviously, you're not Native American, right? You're
Yeah.
not, you didn't grow up that way.
No, I mean, my origin story of that is, I would say is, I guess you could say is a bit strange. Like I'm a, kid growing up in New Jersey, athlete mostly in baseball and basketball. And then in a very short amount of time, I got injured, and my parents just decided to go through a divorce. And my oldest brother went off to college, all within the time of like 2 weeks. And I was 13, 14 at the time. And my life was like, we had like the perfect facade of a family and of a home. And it was really like uprooted.
Right.
Blindsidedly uprooted through an injury. And I didn't see my parents.
Like a serious injury.
Yeah, enough to pause my athletics,
Got
right?
it.
So here I am, like, my life was going this way 1 week, and then all of a sudden just completely uprooted. And at the time, I just didn't really know a sense of myself, because it was my whole identity was an athlete, and for some reason there was this like deeper calling where my life was very stressful, but I found a lot of solace in nature and in being outside, and I started reading. I couldn't play sports, so I very auspiciously picked up a book and started to learn about Native American philosophy and Native American wisdom. And it started to actually make me question the route and identity that my life was taking. And I'm only 13 or 14 at the time. I think I'm 14. And all of a sudden, as my ankle started to heal from the injury, I was like, I don't really think I want to be an athlete anymore. This is really like calls to my soul and my spirit. And so I started getting into Native American philosophy, Native American customs and ceremonies and wilderness survival. And here I am, like living 25 miles outside Manhattan. But I was really called to that. And what started to happen was I would find myself in these circles of learning ancient ways and survival ways.
How did you get into the?
Mostly through reading, and mostly through, I had a cousin who was really getting into that stuff at the time.
Yeah.
And then my oldest brother was getting into it. And then it was like, oh, this really calls to me. And then I found myself at 15. I was working at like a wilderness survival camp, and I was one of the staff there with my brother. And the staff was invited into a Native American sweat lodge. And I was 15 at the time, and I remember having this like momentous, powerful just experience through the ceremony itself, the darkness, the heat, confronting all of this, turmoil inside myself that was very like part of my life at the time, and coming out of it feeling like this massive sense of relief and release. And I couldn't, at the time I was 14 or 15, and I really couldn't put language to it, but I knew it was touching a part of me that was like deep within me, it was primal within me, and it was like a calling from very young. Then as I got more and more into that world, I was introduced to the chanupa, the sacred pipe, the
Right.
tobacco pipe. And I started to realize that pipe and the sweat lodge, the ceremonies were so connected that I remember a medicine man years later, I think I was 17 when I carved my first pipe, that I remember a medicine man saying, if you're a 17-year-old in New Jersey sitting in the woods carving a peace pipe, a chanupa, a sacred pipe, like, you didn't find the pipe found you. And I remember there was a deeper understanding for me that this was going to be part of my life for the rest of my life.
Oh, got it.
And then to those two ceremonies, the sacred pipe and the sweat lodge, I knew at some point, I didn't really know the evolution of what it would play in my life, but I always knew that it would be part of my life. And then as I've gotten older and I've gotten into the work that I'm into, I understand now more the healing modality of it. That I'm so blessed that I was introduced to it when I was so young, and now the opportunity to share it with people that I would. Sometimes I scratch my head like, how did I find myself in this position with these people? And it somehow always seems perfect.
So let's describe a little bit of what the Sweat Lodge ceremony is for those who aren't familiar. It's kind of like an ancient Schwitz.
A little bit like, but it's a sacred ceremony that for our indigenous people in the Americas, each tribe may have a different and unique way and distinction of doing it. And I've sat in many different tribes, sweat lodges since, like I said, since I was 15.
The one you learned from is Lakota.
That's a Lakota lodge. The songs and the prayers are Lakota. But I was first sat in Apache lodges and Hopi lodges and mixtures of many different lodges. But the Lakota lodge and that ceremony and tradition, and I that has always called to me, and I speak about it very, humbly, because these are very sacred ceremonies, and it's not something where, I publicize, this kind of work but I speak about it sensitively. Let me say that, right. And the lodge itself really represents, it's a thatched structure that we cover. And we heat stones outside, and we transfer those stones, those grandfather stones, into the lodge. And we, as you pour water on them, they create a steam, a natural steam, and it gets very hot. It's very dark, and then there's sacred songs that are sang inside of the lodge. And what it represents is really us going back into the womb of Mother Earth and being cleansed. Being cleansed of what I call our obstructions, our judgments, our limiting beliefs, our habits and behaviors that keep us from being what, a lot of Native American indigenous people call like the path of the true human being, a whole human being. I don't think that we are less than, I think we unconsciously obstruct our wholeness. And ceremonies like this allow us the opportunity to go in and remove layer by layer some of those obstructions, those traumas, those limiting beliefs, and those narratives that we tell ourselves. And these ceremonies, and this ceremony especially, I find so powerful because it's really just you and your breathing. There's no outside influence. There's no substance that you're taking. There's no medicine or anything like that. It's you really confronting yourself, the darkness, the heat, the posture. Sometimes the positioning gets challenging.
Right, they're fairly low, they're cramped, yeah.
And you're going to confront something, and your job is the whole time is to keep breathing.
Right.
And I think that has an opportunity for people where it will change your state. It'll change your brain waves. It'll change. You'll think maybe, is there something that he gave me in this? And it's not. It's just you and your breathing. And that ceremony is a cleansing ceremony, really, of cleansing our mind, of our body, of our spirit, to shed some of those obstructions. And it's also a ceremony that welcomes everyone. It's not really a religious ceremony. Right. It's really a ceremony that for people that want to grow and grow into that greater version of who they are.
Yeah, it's very communal in that way. There are a few medicines like that, which I like.
There's something, especially at the end, right? As you go through,
right,
because of the heat and of the darkness. I always say people, we yearn as human beings. We yearn for belonging. We yearn for camaraderie and brotherhood and sisterhood. But we create the most amount of camaraderie when we overcome adversity together.
Exactly.
And so
that's what it feels like. We just did something hard together.
So when you overcome that level of adversity together and you're supporting each other, when you come out, you're like, I know I just met you, but you feel like my brother. And there's this deep level of camaraderie and of brotherhood and sisterhood that comes from it because you've overcome something challenging together.
Right.
Yeah.
There's something also so nice about the nature of it, versus we just put a sun on our property. And, I was sitting there the other day, and it's hot. And you could make it dark, but it's not nature. It's not the same. There's the electrical heater with the stones.
Yes.
It's not. Yeah. You're not touching the earth. It's not, sweating into the earth. It's just a different feeling. It's a very like that. the nature element of it, the stones that we've just heated outside in the fire and are being brought in.
Right.
There's something about it that just feels so, I don't know, like deep, foundational, like
It's
different.
primal.
Yes,
There's something
that's the word I
that's
was
so
looking for.
generational and ancient and primal to it.
Yes.
And also what you're saying too is there's every element of nature is in it. We
The
have
smells.
fire.
Yeah.
You have fire. You have stone. You have the breath. You have water.
Right.
All of these elements come together and they create this magnificent healing ceremony that one of my favorite experiences I've had. I was doing a sweat out in Montana, and at the end, someone came out and they were like, "What happened in there?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but it's like I think this perfect collaboration of nature that comes together and generates this opportunity for an experience, and we're left better from it."
Yeah, I remember the one we did together. It was hot. It was cramped. There were a lot of people in there, a lot. And there was like 18 people in a
Yeah.
small lodge. And afterwards, I felt like in touch with with a level of numbness. Because I think maybe it's everyone, or certainly me. I feel like my journey has been, my like healing journey has been to kind of peel away
Yeah.
levels of numbness, and then we become numb to the numb to the numbness. We don't even know it's there. It's like, is it there? Is that numbness? Is that?
Yeah,
We don't even know.
right.
And I was very conscious of a layer of numbness when I left. And after that, I came home here and I was talking to my wife. I'm like, there's something like,
Wow.
like I'm disconnected from something. And I felt like angry, like spaced out about it, almost afraid.
Yeah.
And then when I woke up the next morning, I felt like refreshed, like completely refreshed. It was like whatever
Yeah.
came up, I kind of got cleared out through the night. And I felt,
That level of relief and release, I think my first lodge was what I was so connected to, because my first lodge that I ever came out of, my experience was actually a lot of shame.
feeling a lot of shame.
I felt I had
Yeah.
this experience of shame and of guilt and all of this, and then when I allowed it to pass, and I think the ceremony created the opportunity for it to pass, because I think I was covering and harboring and numb to so much of what was happening in my life at the time, my parents splitting and my life being upside down, that I didn't realize I had these layers of numbness and of shame and of guilt, and that I never allowed myself to process. And the ceremony allowed me to experience it and process it. And then when it moved through, this sense of relief and of release was so critical. And then I learned later that ceremony is really about like rebirth, going
Right.
back into the womb of Mother Earth and really being reborn in such a way that, you know, in my ceremonies I talk about, like, as we come out of this, we come out better men, better women, better husbands, better fathers, better spouses, better for our communities. You know, we come out improved if
Right.
we let the ceremony, you know, do its work.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed what happened after the one we did together. So it was as part of the men's retreat. And just after the ceremony ended, and I think we sat around a fire immediately afterwards. And then we went to the other side of the property. I don't know if you heard some yelling and screaming,
Yeah.
like that stuff. I don't know if you got a rundown, but there was someone who had come to the retreat who had been through a lot, like a really, really rough childhood with physical abuse and a lot of other challenges. And he came really excited to work through it, like eager to
Yes.
work through it, but in some ways unable to access it.
Yeah.
And during the course of the weekend, he was kind of like wanting it and seeing others get it,
Right.
but unable to reach it. And after the sweat lodge, he came over to the other facilitator, and he's like, I feel like I can like finally let this go. And he said, okay,
Yeah.
let's help you with that. And that's where we went to that other end of the property, and he was able to release whatever it was that, or whatever it was that came up during the sweat, and say,
Yeah.
okay, like now let it go completely.
I think one of the powers of that, and powers of many of these modalities that you talk about and we've spoken about, is they do allow us to confront some of our expectations. And then each time you do certain ceremonies like this, you're like, oh, it's not like it was last time, or I
Right.
thought it was supposed to be this way and this, that. But the ceremonies are so powerful in their own way, is because they're like, yeah, I don't really care about your expectations.
Right.
I'm going to show you what I need to, what it needs to show you.
Right.
And then when you go through some of that work, or confront some of that adversity, or confront some of that adversity within you, and then you drop the expectation, you become so much more open to allow, like, oh, it comes this way. I thought it was going to come this way, and it's really it's presenting itself this way. And I think that's some of the power of some of these ceremonies.
Yeah,
that we
the
find
first time I did it, my feeling is that many other medicines you can fight.
Yeah.
It can be hard to fight, and it's definitely a bad idea to fight,
Right.
but it's possible to. Like
Yes.
I've seen people take massive amounts of psilocybin and
Yeah.
say, like, fight it.
Yeah.
So you felt
Resist
it? Not
it.
really. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the first experience was like, wow, this is one you can't fight. Like between the darkness and the heat, like there's nowhere to go. And you can fight. The only way to fight is by leaving.
Is by getting out.
Yes.
I agree with you, and I say, if there's really nowhere to hide in it,
Right.
you're going to have to confront the heat, the darkness, the posturing, something, and if you are committed to hiding and fighting, you're just going to end up exiting.
Right.
And then you're going to miss the rest of it.
And that will be something.
And there's a lesson in that,
Right.
Without a doubt. That's
because
still part of that ceremony.
someone can walk out of, a psilocybin journey where it didn't hit them, and they can talk about it with the same pride as if they just downed a bottle of vodka and it didn't
Right.
touch them.
And
Look how much I can
drove
handle.
home. Yeah, right.
Look how much I
right.
can handle.
Yes.
But you can't say that.
Correct.
When you run out of a ceremony.
And I think that's also part of the power of there is no substance per se that you're ingesting
Exactly.
in the lodge. It's like, oh, this one just didn't hit me, or this, I don't know, it didn't chemically react. I'm like, well, no, we didn't take anything. Right? So there really is nowhere to hide. And I've had, in historically, I've had before we've even added the stones in, just simply closing the door, right after adding the stones and closing the door and not adding the water.
yet.
Someone be like, I can't, I have to get out. I'm like, well, hold on. Let's breathe. Let's just connect with each other. Let's rely on each other.
Right,
Let's
it's
lean on
really
each other.
warming.
And maybe there's something here for us. This is the ceremony. You're not, and then as they work through that, it's like, wow, like I'm in a space where like I have to depend on other men and trust. And then as they work through that, then it's almost like the heat is a non-factor. Because they actually already worked through what they needed to work through, and then it's almost like the heat is like, oh yeah, pour more, make it as hot as you want. Like I have found that in lodges, once you get the lesson that everything else becomes a non-factor.
Oh, interesting. It becomes just about that.
It becomes I'm here just constantly surrendering to the lesson, to the commitment of why I'm here, to my healing, to that growth.
And you found this as the gift that keeps on giving, and hundreds of ceremonies later, or whatever.
I mean,
it is.
I'm 43 as we're speaking, and I've been doing this since I was 15. This is decades of this modality that I find is even more powerful now than when I first was introduced to them.
Unbelievable. So what was that transition like from being a participant in them to eventually leading them? How did that happen?
So that was a journey, because that was first, it was introduced to me almost similar to you by chance, or
Right.
It wasn't like I intentionally went out of my way. It was, hey, there's this opportunity, you should take it. You're
Right.
part of the staff here, and it's okay, great. And I didn't really know what to expect, and it rocked my world.
In a good way.
And then it was like, never say no to it. Anytime it ever was presented to me, is yes, always a yes, because every time I did it, I just got so much from it over and over again. And then as I went into my 20s, I went through a part of the hero journey of trying to ignore the call.
Right.
And so I went into my 20s, and I was like, I'm going to maybe put that part of my life away, and maybe I'll go become a real individual in society, and I'll go make money, and I'll go into corporate America and all this. And the more I did that, and even the more I gained status-wise and financially, the more trapped I felt. And there was this part of me that I was like trying to suppress and let go, or,
Mm-hmm.
And then finally I was like, I can't. I'm causing too much pain in my own life that trying to ignore this part of me. So I started to get back into the Inipi, into the sweat lodge, and I started to connect more and more with my pipe, the chanupa at the time, and just praying a lot. And then in a shamanic journey that I was in, the revelation that, okay, now it brought me, through the shamanic journey, it brought me into a lodge. And I won't share too long of the story of it, but it showed me like you now, all of this that you tried to suppress, you get to heal that part of you and then step into that leadership role in you and take these ceremonies, these gifts that you've been given since you were young that have helped in your own healing, and now it's time to contribute it back. And so then it became a process of sitting in as many sweats as I could, speaking with as many medicine men as I could. And then this is back in the time of like CDs. This is like before the internet and all that, and learning the language and learning the songs and learning the prayers and sitting with them for hours until finally I had that clear call of contribution. And then starting to pour and starting to lead them, and then letting them really grow into a part of what I do in my work.
Is that a formal process where someone designates you and say, "Hey, you're ready"?
It can be, and ideally, yes. But given some of my circumstance of where I was, and still living in New Jersey, and mine became more of sitting with many different medicine men, and then having that call to finally put it together and lead them.
Right, the medicine itself designating you.
And following that,
right,
in a very a very humble way, like none of this, I look at from the standpoint of none of this is mine. It's my opportunity to facilitate and to contribute it and give it, and none of it I own. I'm blessed with the opportunity to let it do its work through me, and my job is really to get out of its way, or get out of my own way, I should say, and let these modalities do their work and do the work that's necessary. And every time I facilitate a lodge, is like my work is like keep getting out of my own way, leave it, as much of my ego out of it as possible.
I love it. It's you do lead a very you do lead the ceremony in a very humble way.
I appreciate
very
that.
intentional and very. It was beautiful.
I appreciate that. That's my. It's a principle that I bring into every ceremony, is that this has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, right.
And it's so. And I always, if you think of it this way too, and this is like the profoundness and the auspiciousness of these ceremonies have survived through genocide, right? They've survived through some of they've generation after generation of our indigenous people. Like there was a very clear intention to suppress and annihilate and to kill off these ceremonies that we find ourselves in today. So the power of them surviving through all of that, for me to say like, oh, I have anything to do with this is would be so audacious and so egotistical, that I'm just blessed that I found my way into that, and that these modalities have found their way into my life, because they have imprinted and influenced my life in such a way that I wouldn't be who I am without them. And I'm just blessed that I have this fragment of time of the entire cosmos, like this small fragment of time that I find myself in, that I could be a steward to this for my life, that I find to be absolutely humbling.
Yeah.
And it'll live long, long after me.
Right. It's quite interesting because, growing up in a Jewish environment, and oftentimes there's kind of like an inborn threat from any other traditions or ways. Some of it understood from intermarriage. Too many Jews intermarry, and then Judaism ceases to exist. And sometimes there was the foreigners were hostile.
Yeah.
Anyone who was a foreigner was hostile, so it became it oftentimes associated with it, almost like programmed into us
To be skeptical.
to be very more than skeptical.
Oh,
Skeptical is putting
it's
it
a
mildly.
threat.
It's a
Yes.
threat.
Okay, yeah.
It's a threat. And sitting through a lot of these ceremonies, whether they're ayahuasca ceremonies or peyote ceremonies or sweat lodge ceremonies, and just the way it's deepened my connection with Judaism
Right.
in a really, really profound way,
Right.
is has been astonishing for me. And I'll give you like for the ritual, the practice, but specific to this, one of the thoughts that I've had is that, you know, when you talk about the Native Americans fighting, they didn't have to fight, meaning they could have just said, okay, we're Americans, right? And I'm sure many did, right? And they just became, and today you have American people with American sounding names whose great-great-great-grandparents
Right.
were Native Americans who said, hey, it's not worth it. So then the question became like, what are they fighting for? And my thought was, and maybe you said this, is that they were fighting for these ceremonies, these practices, saying we do not want to lose these,
Right.
and we don't want the world to lose these, and we're going to fight for that.
Right.
And in terms of Judaism, connecting that to like the Jews like fighting for the Torah and to protect that.
Right,
and saying
right.
like that is what we're fighting for. You know, we can easily assimilate and stay alive, and in the short term, that would be to our
Correct.
benefit. And
Right.
but we're going to protect our teachings, protect our way of life, protect the Torah. And it's given me an appreciation watching, understanding what these different tribes have had to do
Right.
in order to preserve these medicines in these ways, and recognizing that was the central thing they were protecting. That was my thought. I don't know if you see it the same way.
I think there is the universality of these ceremonies is that I think that underneath the layer of interpretation or dogma, and I see it this way and you see it this way, or my people see it this way and your people see it this way, there is the universality that we yearn for something sacred. And I think when we find ourselves in positions where we're like, this touches a part of me where I know that this is sacred.
Right.
Sacred is worth fighting for.
Right.
Sacred is worth deepening my experience for. Sacred is worth,
Losing our life
losing
for.
my life for,
Right.
or giving my life over to for.
Right.
Like, and there's something like human beings are going to worship something.
Right.
And I hope we're worshiping something that's actually
Sacred.
sustainable and sacred and proactive and positive, because if you don't, you're going to worship addiction and substance and this and money and all this stuff where it's like we have this part of us as human beings that we want to connect to something sacred and divine and worship. It's a deeper part of who we are. And I found in my experience that these ceremonies are so universal because I've sat in them with all walks of life.
Right.
And they don't come out saying, oh, I'm going to let go of my lineage and I'm going to convert to this over here. Most of the time I hear what you just said. These ceremonies have deepened my appreciation for my own lineage, for my own genealogy, my own cultural story, my own family story. And I think that's the power of them, because I think there's a sacred, universal nature that people connect to that doesn't have them lose their
Quite the opposite.
cultural
Right.
story. It has them appreciate it and deepen it.
Right. Right. That's
And that to me is almost, you would think, is ironic or contrary to what you would think the ceremony would do, but that's oftentimes what I hear happens.
Yes. Yeah, and oftentimes the way the healing journey goes, it's like the
Yeah.
beginning of our journey was not a mistake.
Not at all. It's
Right.
that what I call our point of origin.
Yes.
When I look back in my life, I have this point of origin, and it's part of my own personal story. You have your own point of origin.
Right.
And if I'm willing to look back there, I don't go back there to unpack and live there and be a victim to it. I go back there to form insight and appreciation and gratitude, because something in there altered the trajectory of my life that has led me to here. This point of presence, and that my point of origin is made up of my personal story, but it's also made up of my family story, my cultural story, my, our historic story. And that story is ever evolving. And part of us evolving it is to deepen our appreciation that that's how we live as human beings. We interact through our stories. And if I could deepen my appreciation for my own story, I could communicate that in a very humble or genuine and authentic way to you. And then what I have found is by me embracing and appreciating my own story, it actually widens my table.
Yes.
It doesn't shorten it. It doesn't lead to exclusivity. It's like, oh, Ellie, you believe this, so therefore
Right,
I
exactly.
can't. No, my table is filled with so much diversity because the more I do my own journey of authenticity, of authorship of my own story, that just widens my table.
100%.
I think that's that sense of belonging that we crave, but we just get in our own way by exclusivity and by no, you need to be over there and I need to be over here, and like no,
Right.
these inclusion is where we will figure out where our stories aren't coalescing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like from a philosophical standpoint, you would think these, like, they're obviously much more compatible with something like Judaism, right? Or something like an ancient.
Something
Right,
ancient,
right,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Here's an ancient practice that
Right.
people have fought. How many Jews are there now? 15, 16 million Jews when it's the oldest religion. So you got a billion Muslims, a billion Christians,
Right.
and Jews, which predated Christianity by, I think, 1,400 years.
Right.
This little group. So what did this group do? They fought like hell,
Right.
right, to preserve this way. And here you're meeting a people, right, who are currently fighting like hell to preserve their way. There aren't, they've all, any of them that I've met, or talk a lot about the white man and the continued injustice that they're suffering and what's happened in their land and what's happened to their people and what's happened to their family and all those things. And they continue to fight.
Yes.
And they continue. It's just like that commonality there is much deeper than, the guy who uses the exact same language as me and uses the same,
Correct.
eats the same food.
Correct.
It feels like a much deeper.
Yeah, there is that commonality.
Yeah.
That when we shift our focus to that, we see that we have so much more in common than our differences. But when we focus on our differences, then they become irreconcilable stories, which create these divisions. And we're like, well, we're divided over something like this.
I know.
But we're common over something like this. Why are we focusing on that?
Right.
And then I think that's part of the beauty of these ceremonies and of healing itself, is to actually start to realize that my limitations, or where I see limitations in you, like when I drop those judgments and those limitations, I see like the universality of the journey of being human.
100%.
And it doesn't matter your point of origin and how you worship and how this one works. You start to see the universality of it. And that becomes, I think, relief and acceptance and widening the table again.
Yeah. That was, in the ceremony you invited us, and everyone in the ceremony, not everyone, but most of us in the ceremony were Jewish.
Yeah.
And also of an Orthodox Jewish background. So at some point you invited us and said, does anyone want to sing a song? So, one of the gentlemen who sings started it's a Hebrew song, right? A rendition of a portion of the Psalms of David. And then the next day after, he's like, hey, can I get that song? Like, that was awesome. And that was cool for me. Like, hey,
amazing.
You sat in so many ceremonies, but a highlight over there was when we had the opportunity to all sing together in a Jewish song and seeing how that,
And you know what for me was so amazing about it was, so I typically at the end of a ceremony, I'll sing a sacred medicine song from me,
Right.
personal song. And I was like, I'm not singing here. I have all you guys here, like, this is your moment. You sing this song. And for me, what I found so profound was how well it fit.
the song.
The song you all sang.
Right.
And I was like, wow, like you would think that was scripted into this ceremony.
Oh, neat.
And it was so profound that I was like, I don't know what they're singing, as well as you didn't know what I was singing.
Right.
And I was like, but that we're all just finding our little segment of a way to worship and tap into something that's bigger than us. And you call it this, and I may call it that, and someone else may call it something else, but I think they're all rivers flowing to the same sea.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
1,000%. It's neat. And I think that over time, especially in the Jewish community, these will become more and more understood and more accepted and more common. Because, the healing is just, it's so deep and so profound and so primal, and we're missing a lot of those things. We're missing the medicine of the earth. We're missing the medicine of nature. We're missing that a lot in our lives, and here an opportunity to connect to that in such a primal way. And it's deep and transformational.
But I also think it's that level of healing is undeniable.
Right.
You know, if I've known you all my life and I come back after not seeing you for 10 years or so, I'm like, Eli, there's something about you, and I don't know what it is. Like, it becomes undeniable. But it's most important that it's undeniable within me, that I feel it, that I experience it, that I know who I was or pretended to be for so long in this level of wholeness and authenticity that I feel now. You know, these modalities, they're undeniable. And, you know, it's like if I hadn't seen you in 10 years and I'm like, Ellie, what are you doing? Like, it's undeniable. I'll be able to see it. So to limit myself access to it or opportunity to it, I'd only be harming myself or at least harming my own journey.
Amongst Native Americans, being that you've gotten pretty deep into that community, is this something viewed as something we want to share with others or something we want to protect others from? Like,
it's complicated.
I'm sure there's different viewpoints, but
yeah, it's complicated. You know, I think that I've sat with people who are, you know, this is ours and it's ours to protect and it's sacred to us and we don't want it diluted, and I respect that and I understand that. And then I also have sat with people that said, like, this is for people, and the more we get people to understand and respect it, like that almost as a side effect has them look at, hey, this is worth preserving.
Right.
And if I have the opportunity to support and help preserve something, even if it maybe isn't my own blood lineage, then I want to do that. So you have, it's complicated. There's different viewpoints of it. And, you know, now that these conversations are more mainstream than they used to be, you know, I'm talking introduced to these and plant medicines in the 90s.
right.
And I'm a young person at the time. Like, when I was trying to talk to people about it, they're like, what are you doing? Now they've become more and more mainstream. And I think as they do, maybe generation after generation, it becomes, I think our opportunity is to connect to the sacredness of it and the consistency and the lineage of it, respect that, while at the same time you make it accessible to the people that are committed and go out of their way to be part of it. It's not for me to go out there and be some evangelize, like everyone should do this and you should do this. Like, if you find your way into these ceremonies, there's a reason for it.
100%.
I'm not here to go out and say everyone should do what I do. But if you're going to be on a journey of authenticity and of healing, and you find yourself into those ceremonies, treat them with the utmost honor and respect, because they have survived a lot for you to be part of them.
Yeah, and stood the test of time.
And have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I have a level of appreciation for Native Americans that I didn't have previously after experiencing the sweat and peyote ceremonies. And understanding, like, wow, there's got to be some deep wisdom in these communities if they have these medicines. So I just wonder, more people experiencing some of those things and saying, like, hey, there's something here. I have a guy I know who, he's older, and I don't want to call him a healer. He was somewhat of a healer today, and 15 years ago, on chance, he experienced a peyote ceremony. He says it's the last time he drank alcohol. And he was struggling with alcohol like crazy, and I think he said his dad died from from complications related to alcohol.
Yeah.
It's like, how many people have worked like crazy? And I'm not saying this is going to happen for everyone, one peyote ceremony and no alcohol.
Right.
But this happened for this man, and it's not the only guy it happened for.
Countless stories of that.
And it's like, this medicine exists.
Yeah.
And it's out there. And when people experience, like you say, it is undeniable.
It's undeniable.
It's absolutely undeniable. See the changes.
And I think too is it's undeniable in levels of, trauma. It becomes so practiced and so grooved in our nervous system and so grooved in our synapses, and any of these modalities that allow us even just the relief to pause that for a moment, give us this opportunity to kind of let some of that old survival coping mechanism to pause for a moment and get some relief. And then we could start to see some of those point of origin traumas. We could see them either from a new perspective or have a sense of gratitude or appreciation from them, which creates whole new grooves in our nervous system. And these are undeniable.
Yes.
And that's that part of like, okay, Ellie, I see you talk different, but it's more than that. It's somewhere, it's on deeper on a nervous system level, on a spiritual level, that these become undeniable, these modalities. And for that gentleman, like, hey, I used to drink with you and now you don't, like, that's undeniable.
Right.
And like, well, what are you doing that you're not, what's the willpower you're using to not drink anymore? He's like, nothing.
Right.
It's just who I am now. And like, wow, that's gonna challenge some of my old worldviews of how I used to relate with you. And now that we used to drink together and now we don't. And it becomes, again, undeniable.
Yeah. Yeah, for myself, like the changes in me since plant medicine and since like experiencing more and more of these. And I know there's more out there. Like I'm excited to experience more of these modalities. And it's like, wow, this is so powerful. And in my experience, not only shouldn't they be stripped from the sacred, is that they wouldn't have survived if they were stripped from the sacred. There would be no reason for anyone to say, I'm going to fight for this to be here, number one, or number two, that it would be met with the appropriate posture walking in if we didn't use sacred terminology around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've people ask me like, well, what do you have to use the word ceremony? Why can't it just be a healing thing? Well, people have been using the word ceremony for a long time related to this, and those who didn't, stop doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about when we put language to something, we distinguish it.
Yes.
And so there's certain parts even of that ceremony that they make distinct moments in time. That's why we light sage. That's why we light fire. That's why everything is so deliberate and intentional, because it distinguishes this moment in time from the mundane.
Right.
That I deliberately and I, with a sense of commitment, pause the mundane of my life and come into this that I call sacred or ceremony. And by doing that, I'm distinguishing this moment in time. I'm making this moment in time deliberate. I'm distinguishing it from everything else. And that's why these ceremonies, and to call them ceremony, is to distinguish it. And
right.
It puts a deeper level of power to it. And then it's okay, now you pause that level of mundane or that level of everyday life with your everyday concerns, and you deliberately did this and worked through this. And now the real medicine and the real power is, how do you bring this back into your life, where it's the way you interact with your wife and the way you interact with your children and the way you interact with your community or your career or your work or yourself. These are great, these pauses in time, these distinct moments in time. But the true ceremony is, how can I now take that and bring it into my own priority and the things that I claim to love?
100%. Yeah. In the Hebrew, they call it ben kodesh lecho, which is the holiness and the mundane, or another way, ceremony and integration. You know?
Yeah, that integration is so important.
It's like those periods of ceremony, so that then we can bring all that into integration. Yeah. Let's talk about your men's work a little bit and what you do there.
I started my coaching practice in 2010 after I had really gone through a lot of points of pain. I had gone through a divorce. I had gone through some health issues, and I had gone through what I was saying before. I was trying to deny a lot of my authenticity and calling in life, and then said, no, I'm called to do this, and the more I try to suppress it, the more I suffer in life. And not only the more do I suffer, the more I cause suffering.
Right.
And I think for me, that was a point that I really needed to reconcile. I kept repeating a lot of my life of relationships and some of my unconsciousness that I was committed to overcoming. And as I overcame that, I was like, this is what I want to contribute back. And so I started my coaching company for men, and working through really a lot of the authenticity journey and the fulfillment journey, that allowing and using certain structures and healing and point of origin and point of presence and point of power, so that men have an opportunity to create fulfillment and dynamicness in their life. So much of, I think, our cultural story for men is, go be successful, and if you're really successful, it'll fix everything else. And I took that journey for a while, and I created a lot of success in my 20s financially, and I was the most miserable I've ever been.
Right.
And I said, well, obviously something is out with either my story or cultural story, or both. And then I started to really come into more of these modalities, more of my own philosophy and coaching, and I wanted to become a contribution to men, especially high-achieving men and successful men, that you can have it all. You can live from a place of fulfillment and dynamicness, that you could provide and earn, but also be a present father and be a present husband and take care of your health and take care of your community and take care of your rest periods, and that, this foot on the gas pedal all the time is unsustainable.
Right. At some point, something's
going to break.
Yes.
And it's typically going to be a man's health or a man's marriage. That's typically the two one is going to break. And what I found over time in 15 years of coaching, there hasn't been a blueprint for us. This has been the blueprint. Go be successful.
Right.
And if you fill this cup enough that it fixes everything else, and they are operating my business and operating my marriage are two totally different energies. And if I come and operate my marriage like a business, it's not going to work. And so what I found is men have never really been given this blueprint. I certainly wasn't.
In terms of a role model, I felt the same way for a long time. That there was no role model for me.
There was no role model.
I just had to be the role model.
I had to figure a lot of that out on my
Yes.
own. And my role model, my father, was the role model more of, he worked really hard, but he was always exhausted. And he worked really hard, and my parents divorced, and we were the family that the lights were always getting turned off. We didn't have money growing up. I watched my father worked hard, and I was like, well, why are we still struggling?
Right.
And so there was a part of me that was like, well, that model is unsustainable. Right. So I did the opposite. I was like, well, I'm just gonna go make as much as I can, and I just won't get into relationships. And the relationships that I got into, they were a burden, and they kept me from success. And I kind of did the opposite, but that didn't work either.
Right.
And so I was like, well, there must be something in the middle of, because what I found was the models are one-dimensional. It's either go work and be super successful, and if you burn bridges, you burn bridges. If your relationships don't work, they don't work, which now you're just going to lose a sense of belonging. Or don't be successful, just be the best in relationship that you could possibly be, and don't worry about money, and don't worry about providing, and don't worry about all this. I'm like, well, now you just went to the whole other end of the spectrum. That's still one-dimensional. I want the model and the blueprint and the roadmap to teach men that you could be multidimensional. You could be dynamic. That you can be successful and not lose your health. That you could provide and still have a thriving marriage. You could earn and still take time off to deliberately be with your children and take time off to have experiences with them as they get older. That model has not been given to us. And it took a lot of pain and a lot of experimenting with me to find it in myself to be able to contribute that back. But it's the most fulfilling journey that I've ever been on.
Yeah, I'm thinking, from myself pre-medicine, like all of these ideas sounded completely crazy.
Crazy.
Work.
Crazy.
And the guilt I felt when I stepped out of that.
Yes.
I was like, yeah, I did certain things. Okay, I'm going to give a talk or lecture, let's say, so I'll travel somewhere for a few days, then I have to make up for it later in the office,
right.
And I'd be racking my head for it. But now to say, like, hey, I take time off, I do these podcasts, and then they're not just a podcast, like I said. I have a podcast with Faith, which turns into a conversation with you. It
right.
turns into a retreat with that guy, and turns into a weekend, turns into a house, that's suddenly doing things.
Right.
Right. It's not just this. Once you step on the path, so you start walking the path also.
Yes.
But seeing how it's possible.
Yes.
And it's more fulfilling.
Yes, and I was saying, tying this all into we were talking about Native American philosophy. A lot of that concept is called the red road. To walk the red road is to walk that road of a true human being, which has a level of contribution to it. That there's no way that I could understand, experience, and tap into all this and then just keep it to myself. And like you're saying here, as you contribute more and more, another opportunity opens up and another opportunity opens up. And you and I sitting here having this conversation was not planned by you and I.
Right.
It was planned by something so much bigger. it was just enough of us to say, I'll walk this red road, I'll walk this road, I'll continue my healing journey as a contribution to others, because nothing I do is in this isolation. It influences and impacts other people. And as people listen to this, it may challenge some of the worldview, our old worldview of like, oh my God, if I stepped away from work, like, who would I be? What would I do? I feel guilty not working.
Right.
And as people hear this more and more, like, well, maybe let me give that some thought. Maybe that's what my wife has been trying to tell me, that all I do is work and I'm not present. And I can't tell you how many men have come to me and said, I'm really successful. I have a great thriving business. I'm really busy, but my marriage is suffering. And I said, well, what are you doing about that? And they're like, well, I've just been working harder. I'm like, working harder? That's part of the energy that's leading to your marriage deteriorating. She, at a certain point, she wants you. She wants your heart, your presence, your attention. And if all I have is one speed, it's unsustainable. Something's going to break.
Right. I think for a lot of men, the feeling is that is their highest offering, the financial gifts that they can give people. Today I had someone who reached out to me, and the reason they were going through a divorce, and the reason they were put in touch with me was in hope of getting a donation, getting some financial assistance. And as I was talking to them, it was clear the easiest thing would have been, okay, I'll send you a couple $1,000 and
sure,
we're done. But like knowing in that conversation that my highest offering to this woman, to her children, to her family, had nothing to do with finances. The highest offering was, something else,
yes,
a much deeper, gift that Life Lessons has given me, and say, hey, if I can share some of these with her, those can have a much more profound impact, a couple $1,000. And I think that's kind of been probably the biggest transformation, is the recognition that my highest offering to the world is not how much money I can donate to it, how much money I can give away. Meaning even for someone who's of the mindset that contributing is something important.
Yes.
Contributing money it's nice and it does some things. It's not our highest offering.
It's a part of our offering.
Correct.
It's not all of it.
Yes.
And
it's not our highest one.
Nor is it our highest one. Yes, correct. And I think if I only have one speed, it's very easy to just say, well, just make more.
Well, for many men, that's what they're told. That's the message.
That's the cultural story that we live in.
Yeah, the highest offering you can make is financial.
And also, I think with the promise that will fix everything else. And we've proven it way too often that it doesn't fix everything else. It's an aspect of agency and of personal agency and personal power and the ability to have resource and contribute resource, but it's not going to fix a broken marriage. It's not going to fix my ill health. It may give me greater opportunity, but I've got to distinguish it that it's a vehicle and it's not a destination.
Right. Yeah, the greatest, looking back at my story, one of the most pivotal moments was in my young 20s, 22, 23, came across an opportunity that I made, well over $1 million on in a very short period of time. And it was just crazy for me from where I grew up.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, where did this money come from?
And fast.
Very fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, we were starting and we were in business and we were doing okay, but I'm talking the thousands of dollars, right?
Correct.
But here, this opportunity came, and with very little financial investment or anything else, it just, thankfully my partner and I were able to capitalize on it, and this money came in, and when it did, the hole and the depression that came afterwards was fast and deep.
I've heard that.
Everything I was told this was going to deliver was not there. And had it dripped slowly, it wouldn't have had the same message. It was something that was just from one day to 3 or 4 months later, boom, here it is. It wasn't build up over time. It was more than numbers that I'd never seen before in ways that I couldn't imagine it coming in. And when that happened, I was left with this reality that this, you used the word worshiping before, that this deity that I'm worshiping, the dollar, is not going to deliver.
There's no end to that void. That's the problem.
Yes.
And that's why I love your story, because we've seen that story more broadly with the statistic of people winning the lottery and making millions within 3 years, 80% of them are bankrupt
Right.
because you can't put prosperity on a broke mindset. You can't put prosperity on weak character. And I think that's where the disconnect and the fragmentation happens for us is if when things come easy or come quickly and I haven't built the foundation of strong character, I'm going to unconsciously self-sabotage that.
Right.
But if I build it over time and I build it sustainably and I build it through being dynamic rather than one-dimensional, well, when the prosperity comes, it's being built on a solid foundation. I have character to it. I have honor to it. I have principle to it. I have presence to it. I've done the work. I've done
Yes.
this work that it would have the ability, that seed would have an ability to take root and provide a great amount of fruit to it, but it's not going to alter who I am or
Correct.
what I do or the trajectory that I'm on. It would just simply enhance it.
Yes. Yeah. It'll make it easier. It'll make it, more and more possible.
Correct.
The table can have more people at the table.
Correct.
doesn't
It
create
expands the
right.
table. Yeah, it expands the table rather than, I didn't have this 3 months ago. I have it now. How do I not lose it? How do I
Right.
pretend that I earned it? How do I all this facade starts to happen, and it cultivates a deeper sense of void in us rather than a deeper sense of
Right.
fulfillment and sustainability.
Yeah. For me, it was very shortly after this experience that I realized that I'm barking up the wrong tree. Right.
Right.
If the change was that dramatic that quickly,
Yes. Yeah.
and it didn't do anything, then it's obviously not going to deliver.
Right.
I mean, not that I stopped focusing on it. Obviously, it's an important part of life.
Correct.
But I stopped worshiping it. It
Correct.
wasn't an end in and of itself.
Yes, and I think that's it's as subtle as that is as massive a shift it can create,
Right.
because there's an unsustainability to it. Like when will that enough be enough? Because even if I have all of this prosperity, but I'm operating from some old unconsciousness, it's still going to create a scarcity loop in me that's going to be unreconcilable.
100%.
Rather than what if I contribute in such a way from a place of character or gift or skill set or experience,
Earned wisdom,
or
yeah.
wisdom and
Yeah.
earned wisdom and all that's a whole different level
Yeah.
of contribution.
Awesome. Really cool. Any final thoughts? Any?
Wow,
Do you want to talk about your? Actually, say what you're going to say, and then I'll.
I recognize the auspiciousness and the serendipity of our relationship and interaction, our building friendship. That is, it's one of those things where I step back and I'm like, I could have never written it,
Right.
and I appreciate that in such a like a cosmic level. I don't mean to sound like frou-frou-y, but there's such a well orchestrated connection and web that we find ourselves in that I there's no way I could have wrote it.
Yeah,
So
appreciate
I
that.
do appreciate our interaction and connecting with you, and also the work that you're doing and what you're providing, I think is invaluable. So I'm humbled and blessed
Thanks so
to
much,
be able
sir.
to share space and time with you.
Appreciate that. Do you want to talk a little bit about? We're having a conversation just before flying about this podcast idea that you had, and do you want to throw that out there?
Yeah, sure. I'm recently a father, and a lot of my philosophy and a lot of my coaching. These are decades of skills and things that I've acquired over time, and now having a son of my own, and I sometimes think I'm training my replacement in life, and I want to be able to provide a lot of these lessons and skill sets and perspectives and philosophies and experiences of mine that I coach through men, and I want to make sure that my son receives all that. So now my endeavor for this year is to create a podcast called Lessons for Luca. My son is Luca, and to be able to give these strategies and skill sets and philosophies and experiences to an audience of one, arguably,
Right.
which is my son, but also to the men and the women that listen, to provide the opportunity that they gain these perspectives, so that
Right. Just to preserve it in a beautiful way.
yeah.
Yeah, I haven't thought. I didn't think about that, but all these podcasts I'm doing would probably be cool for my children and
as an
grandchildren one
anthology
day.
to hear. This is what I've learned, and my aim in the Lessons for Luca is to not only give my philosophy and answers to the questions, but to be on my own discovery and journey and exploration of the question of what does it mean to be a good man and what does it mean to live a good life.
God.
And that's going to be the theme of
Yeah, those are two important questions.
lifelong answerings to those two important questions.
Okay, so I'll put this out there like I did in person. If there's a way for us to collaborate on that or for us to
would love
support,
it.
yeah,
I would love it.
Would be awesome. It sounds like a very worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you.
To be like a Lessons for Luca and Samuel and Adine and my kids.
Right. Well, we'll add
Yes.
yours in as the subtext.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, the like the wordless subtext.
Yes.
You know, I did a TED talk in 2019 on it's called Escaping Porn Addiction. And it's kind of weird when I did it, right? So you submit to this organization saying, I'd like to give a talk. And they say, great, we'll have you out. But then once I do talk, there's no communication. I'm not hearing anything.
Right.
Is it going up? Is it not going up? And I think I did it in like February time, I think. And then 3 or 4 months later, I'm like, is the talk ever going out? Like, what's going on? And I go through my email, and then I type my name into Google. So I figured, yeah, it would probably come up pretty quickly on a search.
Yeah, right.
No, it would probably come up pretty quickly.
Oh,
on a search.
okay.
I type my name into Google, and I see that a couple days before the TED Talk was just posted, right? But no one had sent me a message. I'm like, oh, shit. And the first thought that went through my head, my son at the time, he was born in 2018, so my oldest, so he was like a little less than a year old. I'm like, oh, shit, this kid's going to get bullied so bad in school for this. Dad, a porn addict. I'm like, is there a way I can pull this down?
Wow,
you know?
yeah,
right. That was the first thought.
my.
And then you know, I kind
Wow.
of sat with that for a little bit, and I'm familiar with the, I don't know if you've heard the term of vulnerability hangover. Have you heard that? Like when you take a risk like that, when you put something out there, there's usually a hangover. Brene
Yes.
Brown talks about that. I'm like, okay, so, you know, a little bit of a rough feeling, but it's also a good sign. It's consistent with, it's like being sore after a workout.
Right, yeah.
Right? Doesn't mean you did it wrong, it means you did it right.
Yes.
Right? So, okay, so, you know, I'm going back and forth with these thoughts, and the next day I said, you know what? Like, maybe that can be my mission, that by the time, you know, he's not going to get bullied at 4 for this,
No.
right? If it would happen at 12, 13,
Sure.
14
So
years
I
old.
got some time to work with here.
And can we change the world enough, the world
Right.
opinion, between now and when he's a teenager or middle school close to it,
Sure.
that someone struggling with porn is viewed the same way someone struggling with alcohol?
Right.
Like, could that change? I don't know why I thought to share it.
Could I, in that amount of time, make this into, wow, this was a gift rather than, you know, some catastrophe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
just and understand, just more compassion around
Yeah.
something like that. You know, sex addiction has a rough. It's very easy to point the finger.
Yes.
at someone. It's like, oh, your sexual depravity is worse than mine. You know, let me
Right,
point
right,
the
right.
finger. It's like, oh, yours is an addiction. You
Yeah.
know? And it's probably because so many people struggle with it that it's like their own personal struggle with it that they then project on everyone else. But there is a lot of shame
Yeah.
around the subject, and I noticed that, and it was the reason I did the talk to begin with.
Wow.
So it's like my motivation, inspiration to do it. Once I did it and it was out there, became the fear that, oh, this is going to boomerang back on me and my family.
Right.
And then the thought, hey, maybe we can do something different. Maybe some of these efforts can create a world where there isn't so much shame around this.
It's a beautiful motivation that rather than, what I say, like a lot of times, rather than change the content, the external, let me change the context, the internal, the environment, so that as I alter the environment, what grows in the environment must change due to law of cause and effect.
Right.
So if I could intentionally alter the context, the environment in which we operate this in, I could turn this from a shame and a catastrophe into a blessing and a healing gift for the future generation or for my son.
Yeah, and then it can be the reverse. It's like, oh, okay, he was the first to, you know.
How about, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like, wow, your dad's awesome.
Right. It turns
Yeah.
out.
Wow.
Right.
Amazing. I love it.
So,
It was a beautiful
awesome.
motivation.
Yes. Anyway, thanks for coming out, and hopefully we get to collaborate together on more healing and more.
I look forward to it.
and more of more, and more with more.
Something tells me we will. So,
Thanks, Michael.
I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.